Hi everyone, welcome to Unit 3. This week you're going to be doing two drawings. The first one is going to be a self-portrait. Or it doesn't have to be a self-portrait, it has to be a head and a portrait. It can be of yourself, you can do it using a mirror, or it can be of another person if you can get a friend or someone who you live with to sit very still for you for about a half an hour or an hour or so and draw a portrait of them. Try as best as you can to do it from life and not from a photograph. So you want to be working either from a mirror or from a model, but not from a photograph unless you really have to for some reason. Before you start, there are a couple of things that you should read in the book. The first thing is this exercise in chapter 1 about drawing the human head, and it just sort of gives a diagram about where things are located in the head. So it might be a good idea to draw a couple before you start yourself, to draw a couple of these diagrams the way they are in the book, where your head starts as an oval shape and then you sort of divide it in the middle. And it's important to remember that you're going to be putting the eyes pretty much right in the center of the head, and then the nose ends about a third of the way up, and then we have our mouth down here. So now you could start making facial features sort of around this diagram. So a couple times practicing this wouldn't be a terrible idea. It'll help you sort of understand what you're looking at when you're looking at yourself. A lot of times people make the eyes up here, which is much too high. So you definitely don't want to make the eyes too high. They are about halfway down your head. So it goes through a diagram drawing of both the head frontal and the head in profile. I don't know which way you'll be drawing it. I'm trying very hard to look at myself straight on. I have a mirror straight ahead of me, but even then my head is tilted a little bit. So that's just something to think about. The other thing that I want you to read from the book is in chapter 3, and it's in the chapter called Choosing Your Subjects, and it's called a section called Drawing Facial Features. They go through just a couple of points of interest about the eyes, and the mouth and nose and the lips, and it's just good information to read. You don't have to do any of the exercises, but just read about it a little bit. It'll give you a couple of things to think about how things sort of work. But ultimately, you are going to be drawing your own face, or the face that you're looking at. So the only way to really get better at drawing yourself or drawing the face is to just practice and to look at it a lot. So this, for most of you, is probably going to be your first drawing of a portrait that you've done. So I am sort of working with that expectation that you've never done this before. Don't get too concerned with making it look like yourself. It can look, as long as it looks like a head, you're in the right spot. So I'm just going to start drawing. One thing I want you to start thinking about is about your composition and about orienting the page. So you can see that I have my paper horizontally, so I have the spiral binding up here. So this is 14 inches so this way, this is 11 inches this way. Really, a portrait would probably work better if I flipped it the other way and I have a vertical piece of paper. I'm going to keep it horizontal because it works better with the frame of the video, but I want you always, this should be one of the first things you think about before you make a drawing, is does it work better as a horizontal or a vertical? So I'm just going to start, and I'm going to start by making my oval shaped circle. I'm going to start the way that I always do, which is to keep my lines really loose and really gestural. This is a lot of the same way that I started making the still life. I just don't want to go too dark too quick. I want to make everything really light. I want to be able to go over lines if they're wrong, or erase lines if I know they're wrong. I'm going to sort of block in where my shoulders are. Like I said, I'm trying to look at it straight on, but you could even tell in this that my head is tilted a little bit. So my drawing is going to have to reflect that a little bit. And I can do as they do in the book. I'll put my mark about halfway. This is going to be where my eyes are. And about the third of the way here, this is where my nose might end. Now everybody's face is a little bit different, so it's good to be aware of these rules and of these suggestions, but it's important to remember that your focus should really be on looking and responding to what you see. So these little tips about proportion and about, you know, this is this big and this is this big, these are helpful to a certain extent, but it's always to remember to be looking for sort of, everybody has sort of subtle variations, and you want to be on the lookout for it. So this is a drawing that hopefully you're going to spend a little bit more time on than the other drawings that we've done. You could do shading, and you could work with some of your pencils. I have a light looking right at my face, and that is something that you might want to think about too, because it makes it more interesting. It's casting some interesting shadows on my face and sort of exaggerating some of the shapes a little bit, and that's going to ultimately make my drawing, I think, a little bit better. So something that people always do with their eyes is they have this idea that an eye is this sort of like perfect almond shape, sort of like an Egyptian hieroglyph. And it's important to sort of learn to break from that as early as you can, just by looking at the big shapes. I sometimes don't even draw my whole sort of eyelid enclosing around my eye, because you don't want to sort of enclose everything. There's going to be a lot of like lost edges, especially in the face. So the measuring techniques that we used last week for the still life, they could still apply here. So for example, if now I have my features really loosely blocked in, I probably don't want to go any further until I know that that's where everything is. So I could take my ruler, or I could just use a pencil, and I could try to measure things where they are. I'm going to measure from the inside point of my eyebrow down. So I'll just drop a line right there. And I'll look and I'll see if this line, like a plumb line, if that hits all of the things in my drawing that I want it to in real life. So I've got the corner of my eyebrow comes down straight. This is going to be, I think my nose is going to be pushed a little bit more this way. So you can do as many of those at as many points as you want. Just as with the still life, the more that you do, the more it's going to lock your proportion in. And then if you want to, you can erase them, you can get rid of them, or you can keep them there. It doesn't matter to me. I like seeing them because I like seeing your process a little bit. But if you want to make a really nice, really clean, complete drawing, you can get rid of them. So one thing that I like to do is I like to keep it as gestural and as loose and as sketchy for as long as possible. So when I have a drawing at this stage of completeness, it's really light, it's really loose, I can do a lot with it. I've got a lot of room. So I made a slideshow for this week that includes some portraits that are from the Met Museum's collection. And have a look at them. See how they're treated differently. See how they treat the subjects differently. Some are drawn up to a very high degree of specificity, and others stay more loose and more open. So there was one, who was it? I think it was maybe Manet drew his wife from behind. That's in the slideshow. And that's very, it's not general, but it's very ambiguous about, you know, where stuff is. It's not ambiguous, but it's not drawing up the details to the most extreme sort of levels. So you have a lot of room, you have a lot of choices. So I'm going to work on this, and I feel pretty good about where the features are located. I don't think I'm gonna have to move that much stuff, but I do wanna make this into a pretty complete drawing. You don't have to draw a background or anything this time. You could just draw just your face if you want, or your head. But I do want to make some shadows and stuff, and I like to draw more sort of tonally, so I don't see a lot of hard lines on my face, so I try not to include a lot of hard lines when I draw a face. So I make more soft kind of tones. So this is where some of your different pencils can come in. So I've been doing this right now with this. I like these pencils a lot. I don't know if they're the most professional drawing tool, but they're these little mechanical pencils, and I just like drawing with them. They're like an HB, so they're sort of right in the middle. So if you have a light hand, you could work with something like this. But if your hand is naturally a little bit more heavier, you might want to do your sketching in with something like a 2H. That's just a naturally lighter pencil, so that you'll keep your line really light the whole time. Right now I want to make some shadows. So what do I have that's good for that? I've got a B, so I'm gonna go with that, and I'll put in first, I'm gonna put in the darkest darks. I'm not gonna record the whole time that I'm doing the shading because it won't be very fun to watch, but I will put up a picture of my image after I've finished it, and I'll show you the level of completeness that I chose to bring this drawing to. You could choose something else, but it should be a finished drawing. Because you're only doing 2 drawings this week and not 4 or more, they should take you a little bit longer. So this should be a drawing that you spend more time on than the other things that you've done this week. So first I'm gonna put, this is actually probably darker than this. This is my hair, which is probably the darkest thing. And then I could erase out some highlights later, but I am just gonna put a pretty dark tone over the whole thing right now. This is a 4B, and I just wanna get some tone down quickly. I also want to change the shape of my head a little bit because I don't think I got it quite right. But I want to just put some tone down quickly. I do want to try to think about the way that the hair is going. So when I'm shading, I sort of go the way that my hair grows and not like I did up here this way. That's not really that helpful. But I don't want to have too many lines. You can choose to do your hair sort of texturally with a series of lines if you want to, or you could try to make it more of like a mass of a tone, which is what I usually do. One thing to do when you shade is you could think about what are the darkest darks, and then think about what are the lightest lights, and sort of work towards the center. And I think that's the easiest way to do it. So don't put in everything right now, just put in, I'm just gonna fill in where the darkest tone is. I know that I'm gonna have to work a little bit more on the shape of like my jaw and my lower head and face. Got a good shadow there on that part of my ear. The eyes are usually pretty dark, although this eye I think is a bit higher. And I've got a nice, because of this light, I've got a really nice dark shadow under my nose that makes it easy to see. Your mouth, one thing that people always do is they want to draw the outline of their mouth as if they're tracing around the edges of their mouth. And that doesn't usually work because the darkest part is where your mouth, where your 2 lips meet. Really hard to draw my mouth while I'm talking. And the same thing with the eye. If you'll notice, I haven't really made the outline around my eye yet. Maybe I will get to something like that, but it's not going to be as tight as you might think. So I have a shadow on this side of my face. It's pretty dark, but it's not as dark as my hair. So I'm gonna try to go back to just the B instead of the 4B. I have a highlight here too that I'm gonna have to erase out later. And this comes a little bit further. My neck obviously is in shadow mostly, except for about right here. So shading is, I think people try to overcomplicate shading a little bit. All I'm really doing is I'm just sort of putting in some tone where I think it gets dark. Now, one thing that I never do with shading, and that you really should never do either, is I don't really blend it with my finger. That's very bad, because your finger has oils on it, and once I blend this with my finger like this, I'm not going to be able to erase it. It's going to really rub the tone into the paper to a point where it's just going to be pretty much there permanently, and I don't want that. So they do make little blending stumps, which are just sort of rolled up pieces of paper, and that doesn't have the problem of having oil on them, but they're really intended to be used very sparingly, and I feel like once people have them, they really overuse them. If you start looking at drawings very closely, if you look at the drawings that are in the slideshow, or if you look at drawings in a museum, you really don't see anybody doing that. You don't see that sort of very blended thing if you really look closely. You can just achieve the level of tonality that you want by just using different pencils and adjusting your pressure on the pencil, and just with that, you don't need to blend. And in fact, you have a much better control if you don't blend, if you only use your pencil. So that's how I'm going to shade the entire face, is just by changing my pencils, adjusting the pressure, and I'm not going to be blending anything at all, either with my finger or with a blending tool. Partly because I don't have a blending tool, but I don't have them because I never use them. Trying to keep everything very soft. And you do have to think about what you're drawing a little bit. If I were drawing a still life, I might not want to keep everything so soft. But like I said, on the face, there's not a lot of hard edges or hard lines on the face. So you want to be careful to avoid really making that many hard lines. I think I made my eyebrow a bit too high, so I'm going to have to erase it a little bit. Just this one part of it has got to go. Again, with erasing, I just erase and then I move on. I don't worry about erasing everything. See, this part of my head up here, you know, it's one of the lighter parts, but it's not really bright white like the paper. So I know that eventually I'm going to be putting some tone down here, and for that reason, I'm not going to work too hard trying to erase every little mark from where my eyebrow was too high. One thing that I try to consider is working all over. So I've been working on this eye for a little while, and ultimately I really want to make sure that the eye makes sense with everything else. So something that happens if you work from one thing to one thing to one thing to one thing is that you might get this eye really great, but then you're not thinking about the proportion and you're not thinking about the whole. So by the time you finish the face, as wonderful as this eye is, it's totally out of proportion and it doesn't make sense. And you don't want that to happen. So the best way to avoid that is to try to work on the whole thing. So don't jump from, you want to be constantly moving around the paper. So if you spend too much time on one area, I want to make everything equal. So if I brought this up to this level of specificity, now I want to bring the rest of the face up to this level of specificity before I go any further with that. And that's going to help me keep the whole in balance and everything proportional. I've got a different shape of my head here that I really want to get. I don't want to be general. So that's the thing, is that the textbook does say that the head is like an oval shape, but you'll see little variations of that, and you want to get them when you can. This is my hair, and then I think my ear is here. So I think I've got another little thing that I want to erase, which is just the hair and maybe that part of the ear. My hair still has to be a lot darker, and I'm a little bit torn as to whether I should worry about that now. Sometimes you don't want to, it's good to just leave it. But also, when you have something like that that's not the right value, it's going to hinder your ability to determine the other values, which I really want to get right. So I think that I might have to spend a little bit of time working on my hair just so that I'm going to get my values to lock. I need to see how the value of the hair relates to this value here. I know this part of my face is very dark, but the hair is darker, and I need to make that happen in my drawing. So with this, I'm not pressing really hard. I'm using a 4B pencil. I could probably use a 6B, but I'm not going to press too hard. I don't want to really push in the paper too much. I want to just sort of keep a light hand on it, and if I have to go over it a couple of times, then I will. I'm not one who likes to draw every strand of hair. I don't feel like that really makes your drawing that much better, but what I will find is I'll find little highlights, like where the light is sort of hitting the hair. And I've got a lot of highlights at the top here, where the light is hitting at the top of my head. And that should be enough to give your hair a little bit of dimension. It only needs a little bit. If you want to think more texturally and think about the hair, every individual strand of hair, you are welcome to try. And there's some people who can do it very well. Kind of the same thing here. It's pretty dark except for at the very right past the part of my hair. That's where the light is hitting it. So I'm going to keep that light. The rest of it is pretty solid. I'm a little bit worried that this is going to look flat because it does look to me like it's pretty much just one tone, but we'll see what happens. So don't get too worried at this point about whether it looks like you or not. If it looks like it's believable as a face, you're doing great. If it looks like the features are in the right place proportionally, think about it, if it's a good drawing, like if you would like it if you didn't know who it was. So this is where you want to make a decision about how much do you want to build this up. I'm going to do some really light shading with a 2H on my face. I don't want to make anything on my face too dark, but I know there's probably nothing on my face that's bright white. The brightest thing right now is my eye, just this part of this eye, which is unusual. Another mistake people make a lot is they want to make their eye, the white of their eye, a bright white, and it's usually not. In this case, the light is shining right in there, so that's pretty bright. But really nothing, not that many things in reality are bright white, like super white. So you want to be willing to make changes and just be aware of the fact that, I didn't like what I just did there. Be aware of the fact that nothing is going to be really bright. So it's not a bad idea at this point, if you want to, just with something like a 2H, something really light, just go over the whole entire face and the whole entire everything and put a very light tone on it. And that's going to be your base tone. So if you put a really light tone over the whole thing, and then work from there. Again, always be checking things like the value and the proportion, even while you're shading. It's harder now because I've got some shading in, it's going to be harder to move things. And that's not ideal, but you still have to move them. If you see that it's wrong, it's just good to move it, even if it's going to be a real hassle to move it because so much of the drawing is shaded. But again, that's a good reason to keep this stuff for as late as you can. Back with my 2H, I'm going to put, there's a lot of light, like there's a little bit of a reflection on my forehead and on my nose, and what I'm going to try to do is put in a light tone across everything and erase them out a little bit. And I'm going to see if it works. Sometimes it works. It usually works great with something like charcoal. Sometimes drawing with the eraser works okay with pencil, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it just looks a little bit like dirty. My 2H is a little bit darker than I want it to be. So I think that after I do this part here, which is sort of a low light part, I might try switching to something even lighter, like a 4H. What else have I got? Oh, I've got a 6H. Let's see what that's gonna do for me. You might not have a 6H, it's pretty light. There's not a lot of applications for a 6H. Now what I'm going to try here, and I don't know if it's going to totally work, I'm going to try to draw with the eraser. So right now, you can't see what I'm doing, but I'm sort of cleaning off the eraser. I've got a canvas cover on this table, and I'm just kind of rubbing the eraser onto the canvas cover until all of the black is off of the eraser, because I don't want to be moving around old stuff. And what I'm going to try to do is just erase out a highlight here. Another thing that I'm noticing right now that I really don't like is that I think I generalized with the top of my head, and I wasn't very specific. So it's not just a perfectly round sphere like that. My hair is sort of making a funny shape, and I want to get that. I don't want to just sort of generalize it. I don't love what the eraser did to that. It kind of gave me a little smudge there, and I would rather not have the smudge. But maybe I'll go over it later with a pencil to fix it. I'm gonna go back with my HB for a while and do some of the other shading. This eye is shaped differently than the other, and that's something that you'll probably notice with yourself as well. And you want to get that. Those little differences are what's going to make it look really good. That's what's going to make it look like an observed drawing and not a drawing that you followed a formula to make. So if you notice stuff like one eye is different than the other in shape, you can barely see the eyelid there, or the edge of the eyelid there. So I really don't want to overdo it. You don't want to make it look like, if you do it too hard, it just looks like everybody's wearing a lot of makeup. And the same thing with the lips. You don't want to draw really the outline of the lips unless you see it. So think about what you see and not necessarily what it is. So, because if you're thinking too much about the way that it should be, every drawing of a person that you ever make is going to look exactly the same. So I'm just putting in the darks where I see them, and I'm not thinking too much about, oh, well, that's my eyelash, or that's this, or that's, you know, I'm just putting, if I see a dark, I'm gonna make it dark. Got a shadow underneath my nose, and I have my little, I want to get the shadow. I want to get the shape of my lips, or the, what I'm looking at is the space between my lips. I'm gonna not say anything for a minute because I wanna, it's hard to do this while I'm talking. I've had a lot of struggles with this part of my, I guess my chin or my lower face. It looks different every time I look at it. Another thing to keep in mind about self-portraits is that they're probably not going to be flattering. So if you want to look like really good, I would maybe let go of that expectation a little bit. Usually, if you concentrate and you look at yourself, you almost never look happy, you know? You always look very serious and not always your best. So you want to get rid of any expectation that you're going to look beautiful. Now once I get to this point, it's really up to me how much more I want to do. And it will be up to you as well. Try to make it at least have this level of tone and specificity. And then if you want to go further, you can. But this is your decision. Once you get to here, it's not going to look like necessarily flattering. It might not even look like you. But if it looks like a person, if it looks like a face with believable features, I believe that your eyes are in the right place and that your nose are in the right place, everything's the right size, then you should be proud of yourself. Congratulations. You've done your first portrait from life, which is hard because you move and you're trying to constantly get back into the same place.